Hello and welcome to Safety Revolution, a podcast exploring the intersection of technology and pharmacovigilance. I'm David Kološić, the Viva Safety Strategy Director. And today I'm excited to host Pav Rishiraj, a pharmacovigilance director and UK QPPV at Ipsen. Pav, it's a pleasure to have you. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you, David. And it's a pleasure to be here.
We bump into each other at every possible conference. We never really get the chance to speak because there's just too many things going on. So I'm super excited to have your time just with you to have a little conversation about the things we care most about. For the audience that doesn't know you yet, could you do a small introduction of yourself?
So I'm Pav Rishiraj, as you mentioned. I'm Director of Pharmacovigilance at Ipsen. I'm also serving as the ABPI PV Expert Chair and also sit on the board steering group for the UK industry. And I've been in pharmacovigilance nearly now for 25 years. I've seen a lot of change. I've seen a lot of evolution, be it stagnated, but it's in a very important juncture right now. Pharmacovigilance, it has moved from a very, what we would say, grey area to a very modular, structured approach now to the discipline. And I'm really excited about the future because I've seen the evolution firsthand through execution. So it's a pleasure to be here.
So you've seen the paper-based ICSRs all the way through to E2B and whatever the future is going to bring. The great thing about your career is that, of course, you have the length, but also you have the width because you attend so many congresses around the world. Of course, you talk about the things that you are passionate about, but you're connecting with so many leaders around the world and you hear their challenges, what's on the top of their mind and what they're thinking about next. So if you could summarize from the conversations you're having, what is on the top of PV leaders' minds right now?
I would say the first topic is we are moving at a very fast pace with our regulatory landscape. And what I want you to envisage here is that pharmacovigilance is the nucleus. So when you think of a molecular structure, so to speak, we are the nucleus of that structure. And what's happening is the orbital around us is moving so fast. Sometimes we don't anticipate the speed and velocity at which it's moving. And if we don't do that, we cannot then start to implement systems, we can't implement change, and we don't foresee risk coming to the forefront in our organizations. So my first call is that being abreast of what's coming is super important because even the so-called less mature countries across the globe are coming up to speed with GVP. And GVP is now entering its 15th year since inception. And it's being adopted across the ICH region. So ultimately, we would like to see more harmonization. We're starting to see that a little bit more in certain functional disciplines or pharmacovigilance. But the regulatory intelligence piece is important. And that starts with the leaders being at the table. When we are discussing with stakeholders, industry stakeholders or trade associations or academics or regulators, we need to be at the table to try to shape how the future would look. So that's the first piece. The second piece is digital and AI transformation. So the digital and AI transformation, it's here. And everyone who says to me, Pav, it's coming. And I always just say, it's here. And we have to embrace it. And we have to think about how systems can serve our purpose. And we have to see how systems can serve our discipline, not how our discipline can serve the system. There's a big difference in that.
Yeah.
The third piece, what I will say, is that we need to move to predictive safety. I always use the analogy of a car and pharmacovigilance. We have got most of the components ready for a car to be started in pharmacovigilance. The systems, we've got the governance, and we've got the procedures, the policies, and so forth, which are the frameworks which enable this. However, we need to start that car. And that car, which we need to start, needs a driver. And that driver are the leaders. The drivers, the QPPVs, the leaders, we have to be the ones who are putting our hands on the steering wheel and driving it into the right roadmaps. Because these three topics in terms of strategic pharmacovigilance should be at the forefront of every PV leader's mind. The fourth one is probably the most important of them all. Our teams. What we're seeing is we are moving ahead with wonderful technology, wonderful automation and AI and digital transformations. But our teams are not being upskilled. And the pharmacovigilance scientist or professional will look different in 18 months, let alone in 5 years, right? So we have to make sure that, are we building our teams with the right capabilities, number one? And then when you've built the capabilities, do they have the right competencies to move this forward? And, you know, we mentioned about human in the loop a few times when we've met. And that's where that comes into play, because I'm a firm believer, David, that through PV leadership isn't just about teaching technical and GVP. You can teach technical skills, you can teach GVP, you can teach landscape, you can teach regulatory guidances and so forth. Anyone can pick it up, and with a good coach, you can interpret it, you know, in the right way. But there needs to be some human skills, and not soft skills, right? Human skills, articulation, delivery to the C-suite around our why. Why do we get up in the morning? What's our purpose? Compliance isn't our purpose. Our purpose is benefit risk. And that's the reason I get up, to make sure that I'm making a difference to the patient and societies we serve. We're not asking our teams to become computer engineers or software developers. You have to be flexible in both your leadership and your execution. And this is where leaders need to adopt a three-pronged attack in their leadership. The first is being a subject matter expert in what we're doing. The second thing is ensuring that the management of any deployment of technology or any unification across your system is well-oiled, so to speak. And then the leadership part, there's 3 parts here. The leadership part is the most important. You are the voice, and you are the change, and you are going to make that change through your voice in the way you articulate.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. So there are 2 things happening, right? On one side, we have the technology is advancing at such a rapid pace, and we've seen that huge shift with, you know, the new technologies coming through, changing the way we think, not just in pharmacovigilance, but in the society. But on the other hand, so many stakeholders involved, and of course, life sciences, for very good reason, is heavily regulated. But you're right, we need to work together with the stakeholders, whether it's the trade associations, the regulators, the PV leaders, the PV teams, to steer the ship in the same direction. You mentioned harmonization at the beginning, so maybe how do you see the evolution of regulations happening across the regions? Do you feel that we are steering towards harmonization?
I would say that I'm seeing more harmonization now than I ever have before in my career, at least in the discipline. We have, the International Conference of Harmonization, the ICH, and their sole objective is to make sure there is harmonization. But across the globe, we are seeing some divergence. We are. And that's only because, to respect the national legislative positions from various nationalities and countries, that each regulator will always want to see something slightly different to most adjacent regulators and so forth. But when you look at the majority of the regulators, they are using GVP as their foundation for their guidance at a national level, right? And we're seeing this not only in obviously in Europe, we see it with GVP, but we're seeing this across the Arab states, and we're seeing it across the APAC as well region. So there are going to be slight variances and slight divergence, slight, and when I mean slight, but generally the core of it is we're starting to see more convergence, and we're starting to see discussions happening to ensure that, as you mentioned, that we are going through into the right direction of travel. We do not want to see 5 pathways when we know one pathway, so to speak, works in terms of legislation, right? So we, in the trade associations as well, and I know this across the globe, that we are trying our hardest to make sure that, we all are singing from the same hymn sheet.
Yeah.
And if there is a variance, then we respect that. But let's keep the core as a convergent legislative landscape. Yeah.
So we're on the right pathway. We are moving forward with technology, because the modern technologies or the strategies I'm seeing PV leaders are following more and more is consolidating, right? So historically, for a very good reason, new regulation came, you had a new challenge. What did you do? You implemented the system. And of course, that eventually became a spaghetti of systems, so many different systems, silos, again, for very good reason, because that's how technology was working back then. But now what we are seeing is the value of bringing it all together under the same roof. I like to say one-stop shop. So you don't have to think about all of the technical challenges of trying to integrating and somehow connecting the processes using all of the creative ways. Are you hearing the same things when you talk to the PV leaders? Do you feel that this strategic direction is towards consolidation, or do you still feel that there's a lot of silos going on and a lack of understanding of why there's a value in bringing it all together?
Yes, there is what I would say variance in how PV leaders are seeing this across the globe. I will always advocate that a unification of systems internally across the R&D value chain is the way to go. If we really want to make empowered decisions and data-driven and evidence-based decisions for strategic advantage or differentiation, so to speak, then we need to move to these unified platforms and not work in silos. We have, across industries, so many data lakes which need cohesion, which need one place, one trusted source, and one source of to say, this is our evidence, and this is the decision we made based on the evidence which we have. And we know across the R&D value chain, there are so many data lakes and secondary data lakes, and there's lakes coming off the lakes.
And different interpretations of data, right?
Yes.
We're talking about the same product, we're talking about the same patient, or we're talking about the same clinical study, but the way different teams interpret it, or the way they model the data is different, right? So like, how do the systems even talk to each other if the data is being interpreted in different ways?
Correct, yeah. And if you have one platform which unifies this and makes it cohesive, then of course the outcomes and the return of investments are huge. I mean, the gains are so strategic that I don't think they're actually being realized. So what we also need to do is, within internal spaces, is to standardize and at least provide a data structure or governance to how data is structured in a way that it fits the system as well, so that everyone reads the same thing, because we could receive different types of data from different data lakes, but it's bringing that data in a standard and harmonized format. And externally that the ICH E2B format has always evolved to make sure there is a standardized reporting, for example, for case reports, that we are singing from the same hymn sheet. This requires, David, a full systems thinking approach. We classically in the field are not really good at systems thinking. We have been trained scientifically, we've been trained in terms of evidence-based, but we need to think holistically in the system. To unify data, we also now need to think outside of the box ourselves as humans, as leaders, to see how can we bring this all together? Because as I mentioned, the gains for this is astronomical. And I will say astronomical because I have seen this in practice already for a couple of organizations where I've seen where this is working really well. I should be seeing the same things as my other colleagues in the R&D value chain. Why should I be seeing different aspects of data? And it always starts with the quality of the data you have.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And I think this conversation goes well beyond PV because, as you said, PV is the nucleus, right?
Yeah.
We like to say we're in the center of the world. But we have such a huge reliance on the outside. We have the reliance on the regulatory team to give us the latest information of where the products are registered. We have the reliance on the clinical teams to tell us, well, these are the clinical studies we are running, a commercial team for the PSPs. Then, of course, the patient information is coming from various sources. So there's so many things to harmonize, and it's impossible. Like, it's a task that PV alone cannot do. So it's also lifting that up to a high level and having that alignment across, like you said, the R&D and even commercial value chain. I think that leads me to the next point, which I think you're passionate about, is how can the PV advocate? PV is quite often seen as a cost center, but we are now talking about strategic initiatives, and actually PV can generate a lot of value. How do we do that?
How do we move from a license to operate function to strategically enabled? How long's a piece of string is the first answer I always respond to. Let's start from an introspection point of view. How are we educating and increasing visibility in our organizations? It starts with education. Are we talking at our stakeholders, or are we talking with our stakeholders? Let's start. Our tone, our delivery, our why is important. Even before we can make any changes from a strategic point of view, or any impact, or any return on investment, it starts with language. And notoriously, the language is at times skewed when it gets to the C-level, because the issue we have is we are seen as a compliance-driven function. It starts with us. The messaging starts with us. The visibility starts with us. We are the ones who are wearing the PV badge. We should be seen as that strategic enabler. We should not be seen as we're coming over to do compliance, because that's not a good return on investment. So it starts with education. And I will continue saying this probably until my whole pharmacovigilance career, is all of us are either privileged to have children, all of us are either privileged to have nieces or nephews, or we are privileged to have family members who have children. Okay. My call is always this, is if any one of those children come up to you and say, what do you do? Can you answer it? I'll leave it like that. That's just a thought. Reflect. How will I answer this question? Because if you can't answer that question simply, then no one else is going to understand it in the organization. Also, I'm going to go back to data. Articulating what we can do with the data we have, considering our discipline is evidence-based, is extremely important as well. It's not just about saying we've got all these data lakes. It's about what we're going to do with it. What's the end result? What insights can it give us? Because, if we can differentiate strategically, or if we can provide faster benefit risk assessments to the society or patients we serve, what an excellent return on investment. And that links beautifully into our purpose. So again, it starts with a why. Why do you want this unification of data? It's not a nice to have. Well, let's think about the end goal in mind first. What we tend to do is we just look at a problem and we solve it, but we don't see you remember I said about systems thinking?
Yeah.
Looking across blue sky, looking at what is our horizon at the moment? That's where we need to be. And that shift or that transition is hard because we are built as scientific leaders.
It starts with us, right? Like we have to, if we don't advocate for ourselves, if we're not in those rooms, making sure that we are sitting at the same table, talking with other functions, other leaders, then no one else is going to do it for us, right? So it really starts with us. I also agree with you, like the why. So on one side you have compliance, but this is your foundation for then the actual why, which is the benefit risks. Like, so this is the vast data you have available based on which you can make very important decisions. I think that's the shift in the mindset. Like the reason why we're collecting all of this data, the reason we have all these processes in place is because at the end we're serving the patients, and to serve the patients well, we have to make important decisions, and the way we make these important decisions is by having the data-driven approach. But like you said, if you have the data in multiple silos, then it's a little bit difficult to make these decisions, right? Because you're looking at multiple places, you're trying to make some connections, which is very difficult to make. By connections, like, trying to make a story out of the data that you have available. So I think that's the direction we will have to move towards. Like you said, having one unified place, one platform where all of that data is available, and being able to make those decisions. But you're also right what you said before. Because the technology is moving so fast, things are changing so fast, but as humans, we are creatures of a habit. We don't like to change. I like to do my same routines every morning, not just in my work, but in my life, because it feels comfortable. So you mentioned that change management piece. Of course, we will have to evolve. It doesn't mean that people would lose jobs. No, the jobs will just be evolved into something that is more value-driven.
Sure.
But how do we help people understand that technology is not bad, that technology is actually there to augment, to help them do work in a more meaningful way?
I like the word augment because I think we may be synced here on many aspects. So I've always said, let's reframe the two words artificial intelligence, and let's think about augmented intelligence. David, if we want to move to predictive safety, real-time monitoring, we need to be quicker, and speed is important. The front end of pharmacovigilance is notoriously laborsome, and we know that processing data can be sped up quite quickly if we wanted to. But ultimately, I want you to think of a pyramid. And at the top of the pyramid is benefit risk. Then you have, so to speak, quality, documentation and governance. And then at the bottom of the pyramid, you have case operations. Okay, so we're spending so much time on case operations and so forth. But I wanted to inverse that pyramid. And if we can spend all that time on benefit risk, straight away, your value's there in terms of return on investment and proposition, right? So let's spend less time on what we would say, the mundane, the robotic tasks. Because what we need, if we want to move to the future of safety, and of course the predictive analyses and real-time monitoring when we're making benefit risk decisions on a rolling basis, not waiting until a milestone is reached, then we need to ensure that we deploy systems, tools, and processes which will enable us to expedite our decision-making in such a fast way that, in fact, if the external landscape blinks, then we are faster than them, so to speak. We need to focus on what we need to do in terms of value-added tasks. And a value-added task is we are here for benefit risk and ensuring that patients continue to receive safe and effective medication, right? So why are we not spending all our time on benefit risk? At least 75% of our time should be spent on our purpose, right? If it's not, then we need to have a good look at ourselves. And when we're looking at the systems, David, and you mentioned some very important points around systems. We are notoriously known also to implement new systems based on old processes and old ways of thinking. That's not a very good starting point. We've always done it this way, so why can't the system fit our process and procedures to what we've always done, right? No, this is a perfect time for you to rip up all of your processes and to start to design the system which is built, not only which is fit for purpose, but which is built for now, a midterm, and of course the future. So I'm sure with your experience as well, David, you've probably seen some elements of this where we've always done it this way. but that's not the right approach.
It's a weekly discussion I'm having.
Okay.
And it's a difficult one because, like I said, people are creatures of a habit. Following the same process feels comfortable. But the reason why the emerging modern technologies are beneficial is because they give you a different way. So the new technologies that are being built today are being built based on what is relevant today.
Right.
Some of the processes companies have are built on all of the baggage of the last 20, 25, 30 years. Of course, it makes sense. It was the evolution trying to improve processes little by little. It was kind of adding this bit and this bit and this bit. Going through digital transformation is a very good opportunity to just disrupt the whole thing and say, okay, yes, this is important, but maybe let's take this as an opportunity to find a better way to work. So I think the ways of working have to change, but that also means the mindset have to shift. The people have to be trained, as we said, right? It's a completely different ballgame, and that's gonna take a while. And maybe that's a good segue to the future. So, what do you feel is a business challenge today that is going to be a solved problem in the next 5 years?
For me, that's probably relatively easy to respond. It's the front end of pharmacovigilance, the operations side. I think in 3 years, David, I think most organizations will have this sorted in terms of speed and velocity.
Safety operations.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not talking here around no touch, right? I'm speaking here more around human in the loop, so to speak.
Yeah.
How that human in the loop looks, but there's going to be a lot of what I would say a less touch process here, because that is what we would say the rate limiting step in expediting benefit risk assessment. That is exclusively the hindrance for us to make faster benefit risk decisions, right?
Bottleneck.
Yes, it is. And it's always because, look, we have access to tools, we have access to many facets of technology. Reporting systems are becoming more mature, patients are becoming more aware, conversations are happening at the HCP level, and of course the patient caregiver level as well. So information needs to travel fast. And when we receive information, we also need to travel it on fast as well. I would say not only is that a business challenge, but I'm an optimist around, I would like to see pharmacogenomics being integrated into our R&D value chains as well for pharmacovigilance, as well as many other facets. I believe that in 5 years' time, we should be not fully mature in this space, but I believe this is going to be the key component to the future of pharmacovigilance.
The next big thing.
Yeah. Pharmacogenomics, I spoke about predictive safety. And we all want to move to that. And this is not about predictive safety using various large language models or whatever, agentic AI or generative AI. It's nothing to do with that. This is outside of that. How can we actually really have a relationship with a patient to say, we can predict adverse drug reactions? And this is a real huge push at least in the United Kingdom, under the yellow card biobank scheme, which the MHRA are leading very meticulously. That here we are with a partnership with the regulator and the academics and patient groups, moving towards predictive safety. And as an organizations, we can do that as well. The whole industry can do this, but it takes time. So I'm going to be bold here. I'm hoping that in 5 years' time, that we would have started to make some segue into this, but what I would say, can I say 99% guaranteed? Maybe that's the wrong word to use. Maybe I'm being too optimist. Is that the front end of pharmacovigilance, the end-to-end, the exchange of information with external databases, we should be in a good space by then. And that is a business problem being solved.
I think that's a good future to look forward to, because again, at the end of the day, we are serving the patients. So with this, we are serving the the why, right? The why that we have. To end this episode, I always like to ask the same question. If your PV system was a superhero, who would it be?
For me, it would have to be Superman or Superwoman. Okay, I'll tell you the reason why. Because our eyes are everywhere. We are vigilant across the horizon. We can make a rapid change, or we can communicate very quickly, as these superheroes do, through various superpowers which we have, algorithms, if you want to say, through our processes of signal detection, risk management. And then we also have that laser focus when we need to laser in. But we also can understand how the world's evolving and how that, I mentioned at the start, that landscape. Well, when we have our capes on, we fly and we can see that whole landscape moving from above. And then that's where we can fly in to see where we need to be at the right place at the right time.
That's a great analogy. That's a good way to see it. With this, Bev, thank you so much for joining Safety Revolution. It was a great conversation, and I'm hoping that the audience is going to enjoy it as much as I did.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much.